The most dangerous prison is not made of walls or bars, it is built inside the mind. And the most skilled manipulators do not use force, they use thoughts. They use words, tones, patterns, and emotions to shape what you believe, what you fear, what you love, and what you obey. They pull the strings not of your body, but of your perception. The greatest weapon in history was never the sword, it was suggestion. Empires rose and fell not because of armies, but because of ideas. And today, in a world flooded with noise, where attention is currency and confusion is control, your mind has become the battlefield. You are either training it or someone else is training it for you. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's how manipulation works. It hides in your blind spots. It thrives in the unseen places, in the thoughts you don't question, in the emotions you assume are yours. It whispers, "You are choosing this," when really you've already been chosen. You see, the modern world doesn't manipulate you by threat, it manipulates you by desire. It feeds you what you want to hear, gives you what you think you need, and keeps you in a cycle of craving. It doesn't demand obedience, it seduces it. It doesn't control your body, it consumes your attention. And attention, your most sacred currency, is what they steal first. You scroll, you click, you compare, you consume, and slowly, invisibly, your focus fractures. Every notification is a command. Every algorithm a hypnotist. Every image a suggestion. Be more, buy more, chase more. And you think you are free because you are choosing. But choice without awareness is not freedom. It is manipulation disguised as autonomy. To resist manipulation, you must first understand the mechanics of it. Manipulation begins not in the world, but in the psyche. It starts with projection, someone else's insecurities dressed as authority, someone else's fears disguised as your duty. It moves through conditioning repetition of messages until they sound like your own thoughts. And it ends in possession, when the manipulator no longer needs to speak because their voice already lives in your head. Think about it. How many of your beliefs are truly yours? How many of your fears were planted there by culture, family, or ideology? How many of your goals are genuine, and how many are just echoes of what society told you success should look like? Most people never stop to question it, because questioning requires solitude, and solitude terrifies the manipulated mind. It's in silence that you start to hear what's not yours. It's in stillness that you meet the voice beneath the noise your own. The mind untrained for independence will always seek control. If you do not master your attention, someone else will. If you do not control your narrative, someone else will write it for you. If you do not anchor your truth, you will drown in the flood of illusion. To train your mind to resist manipulation, you must first reclaim your awareness. Awareness is the antidote. Awareness is the sword that cuts through deception. Because when you see the strings, you can no longer be the puppet. Begin with observation. Every time you react, pause. Every time you feel triggered, inquire. Every time you want to prove something, ask, who am I proving this to? Most manipulation operates through emotion, because emotion bypasses logic. It doesn't ask for permission, it demands reaction. Fear, guilt, flattery, belonging, these are the tools. When someone wants to control you, they will not attack your reason. They will seduce your heart. And so the mind must become both philosopher and warrior. You must learn to feel deeply, but think clearly. To sit with discomfort without fleeing into distraction. To recognize when your emotions are being weaponized. When someone tries to guilt you into compliance, that's not love. When someone tries to flatter you into agreement, that's not respect. When someone uses fear to make you obey, that's not guidance. These are not connections. These are contracts written in invisible ink. Break them. Not with anger, with awareness. The manipulator feeds on resistance as much as submission, because both keep you locked in reaction. The true power is not to fight the game, but to step outside of it, to observe the manipulation without becoming it. That's what Jung meant by integrating the shadow, becoming conscious of the hidden forces that move you. You are not free until you can see your own triggers and still choose peace, until you can witness the attempt to control you and still remain still inside. The goal is not to harden, but to awaken, not to become emotionless, but to become emotionally intelligent, to feel everything yet remain sovereign in what you act upon. Because manipulation doesn't just come from people, it comes from systems, media, culture, and even your own unhealed patterns. Your unhealed self is the perfect target. The parts of you that crave validation are the handles by which the world moves you. The parts of you that fear rejection are the doors through which others enter. The parts of you that seek approval are the scripts that anyone can rewrite. So, the first step in resistance is self-awareness. The second is self-ownership. Because when you know your weaknesses, they can no longer be used against you. When you integrate your shadows, they lose their leverage. And when you master your attention, you become untouchable. This is not paranoia, it is psychological sovereignty. The world will always try to sell you certainty, comfort, or belonging. But true strength lies in your ability to stand in uncertainty, discomfort, and solitude and still not betray your truth. Most people fear manipulation because they fear isolation. They would rather be controlled than be alone. But solitude is not loneliness, it is liberation. It is the environment in which your mind detoxes from the voices of others. It is the silence where you remember that freedom was never out there. It was always within. Train your mind to be comfortable in that silence. Sit with the unease until it becomes peace. Learn to recognize when your thoughts are being hijacked by external influence. Notice the subtle ways the world nudges your identity. Be this, buy that, believe us, obey, and ask yourself, why? Because the moment you question, manipulation begins to die. It cannot survive inquiry. It feeds on your unconscious participation, not your conscious awareness. Nietzsche once said, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And Spreko, to think for yourself is not rebellion, it is evolution. It is the highest form of courage in a society built on psychological obedience. You will be misunderstood. You will be labeled difficult, defiant, arrogant. But what you are truly is awake. And to the sleeping, the awake are always threatening. So train your mind like a fortress, but let your heart remain like water, impenetrable to manipulation, yet fluid enough to adapt. The mind must be disciplined, the spirit untamed. The world will keep trying to shape you, but once you know your shape, the sculptor's hands lose power. That is the paradox of mastery. You become unmanipulable not by resisting the world, but by understanding it. Not by hardening, but by seeing clearly. Because clarity is the highest form of power. Clarity is what manipulative systems fear most. When your mind is clear, guilt cannot move you. Fear cannot blind you. Flattery cannot seduce you. Control cannot possess you. You walk through illusion like a flame through fog, untouched, unharmed, unstoppable. And the world feels it. Your silence becomes unsettling to manipulators because it mirrors their emptiness. Your stillness becomes terrifying because it reveals their chaos. Your awareness becomes contagious, a light that breaks the spell for others. This is how the cycle ends. Not by fighting manipulation, but by evolving beyond it. By becoming so self-aware that no one, not a person, not a system, not a thought can trick you into leaving yourself. Because that's what manipulation really is, the art of making you abandon your own mind. And the cure, the eternal cure, is awareness. Train your mind until awareness becomes instinct, until you can feel the pull of influence and smile at it, until you can see the game and still choose your peace, until no amount of noise can drown your inner knowing. That is when you become sovereign. That is when you stop reacting and start creating. That is when the world can no longer use you as a pawn, because you've become the player. So guard your mind, sharpen your awareness, question everything that tries to own your attention. And remember this: the freest mind is not the one that knows the most, it's the one that sees clearly. Because in a world built on manipulation, clarity is rebellion. And when that clarity begins to take root inside you, when you start to see the patterns not as isolated events but as architecture, you realize just how deep manipulation runs. It isn't just in advertisements or politics, it's in religion, it's in the social norms that tell you what's respectable. It's in the silent agreements that decide who deserves to speak and who must remain quiet. It's in the way you apologize for existing before you even open your mouth. You begin to understand that manipulation is not an act, it's an ecosystem, a psychological climate designed to keep you uncertain, obedient, dependent. When you don't know yourself, you can be sold anything. When you don't trust your instincts, you can be led anywhere. When you can't sit alone with your thoughts, you will chase distraction until your will dissolves completely. That's why empires throughout history have always feared thinkers more than armies. A free mind cannot be enslaved, it can only be invited. And once invited, it must choose. That choice, that conscious awareness, is what separates manipulation from influence. Influence offers, manipulation imposes. Influence illuminates, manipulation obscures. Influence empowers, manipulation extracts. And yet, so few ever reach the level of awareness needed to see this difference, because awareness itself has been commodified. They sell you self-improvement to keep you dependent on their validation. They sell you mindfulness to keep your mind half asleep. They sell you freedom in the form of digital addiction, dopamine loops, and ideological cages painted gold. You were told to chase success, but success in whose system? You were told to fit in, but to what shape? You were told to believe, but in whose version of truth? Everything that manipulates you begins by defining your terms. If they define what good means, they can make you feel guilty. If they define what normal means, they can make you feel wrong. If they define what success means, they can make you run forever. But the moment you define those things for yourself, the structure collapses. Because self-definition is rebellion in a world addicted to control. This is why every manipulative force targets your identity first. If they can make you question who you are, you will cling to them for guidance. That's how religions hold power. That's how governments maintain obedience. That's how toxic people keep you small. They create confusion, then sell you certainty. They wound you, then offer themselves as the healer. They destroy your self-trust, then make you dependent on their approval. You think you're choosing them, but they have already chosen the version of you that serves them best. That's why training your mind is not just an act of survival, it's an act of revolution. It's how you reclaim the throne of your own consciousness. It's how you stop living as a character in someone else's narrative and begin authoring your own. To train your mind means to question reflexively, not cynically, but curiously. To develop what Jung called inner authority. It means that when you hear something, you don't immediately react. You examine it. You weigh it against your principles. You feel its vibration. You test whether it aligns with your truth. And if it doesn't, you let it pass through you without attachment. That's how you become mentally untouchable. When nothing external can hijack your peace, because you've made peace an internal condition, not an external result. But this training requires discipline, and discipline is rare in an age of dopamine. The manipulators depend on your mental laziness. They count on your emotional hunger. They need your constant scrolling, your constant reacting, your constant outrage. Because the moment you slow down, the moment you become still, their control loses power. Stillness is subversive. To sit quietly with your thoughts in a world screaming for attention is an act of rebellion. To think before responding is revolutionary. To observe instead of react is dangerous to them. When you start training your mind this way, you begin to see manipulation not as something external, but as something internalized. You see how often your own mind mimics the tactics of your oppressors, how you gaslight yourself, how you guilt trip yourself, how you emotionally blackmail yourself into staying small. That is the final layer of manipulation, the self-replicating one. The moment the manipulator no longer needs to control you because you've inherited their voice. The moment you stop hearing your intuition and only hear their conditioning. But awareness burns it away. Every time you catch the manipulation, it loses strength. Every time you name it, it dies a little more. Every time you refuse to participate in it, you reclaim your power. You begin to understand what the Stoics meant when they said, the mind is its own place. You see that your internal world creates your external reality, that the person who masters their perception masters their fate. So train yourself not just to think critically, but to perceive consciously, to look beneath surface narratives, to feel the intention behind the words, to notice the frequency behind the message, because manipulation operates at the level of vibration, not vocabulary. Someone can speak truth and still manipulate. Someone can sound kind and still control. Someone can promise freedom and still enslave. This is why discernment is the rarest form of intelligence it requires, both intuition and intellect working together. And discernment can only exist in a quiet mind, not a numb mind, a quiet one, a mind so trained that noise cannot enter without permission, a mind that has become a gatekeeper of its own energy. When you reach that level, you no longer fear manipulation because you can see through it instantly. You can hear the emotional tone beneath every statement, fear, flattery, guilt, and you don't bite the bait. You respond with calm awareness, and that calm becomes your shield. This is psychological jujitsu, using the manipulator's energy against them by not resisting, not reacting, not feeding, because the only thing that sustains manipulation is your attention. Withdraw it, and the entire structure crumbles. The manipulator cannot survive without an audience. Systems of control cannot exist without belief. Propaganda cannot thrive without outrage. They need you reacting. So the most powerful act of resistance is to stop reacting, to move through life consciously, quietly, deliberately, to let the noise rage outside while your mind remains still. You will see that manipulation was never as powerful as it pretended to be. It only seemed that way because your attention gave it life. And when you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your destiny. Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. The manipulated look outward for approval, for belonging, for meaning. The awakened look inward and create it. That is the difference between the puppet and the creator. The puppet seeks strings. The creator moves freely. The puppet needs direction. The creator acts from clarity. The puppet fears solitude. The creator finds strength in it. And that is the ultimate freedom, to live as your own authority in a world built on psychological dependence, to think, to feel, to decide from within, to walk through a society built on control and remain untouched by it, to look at every attempt to sway you and respond not with fear, but with awareness. Because awareness is not passive, it is power disguised as stillness. It is the sword no manipulator can touch. It is the flame that burns through illusion without ever being consumed. So let the world shout, persuade, seduce, deceive. You will stand at the center of it all, calm, awake, sovereign, not a pawn on their board, not a product of their narrative, but a creator of your own mind, clear, deliberate, unmovable. That is how you train your mind to resist manipulation, not through rage, not through rebellion, but through revelation. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you awaken, you cannot be owned. And once you know who you are, no one, no system, no person, no ideology can ever tell you who to be again. And so, when the spell finally breaks, when the fog that once covered your perception begins to clear, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't change. You do. And because you do, the world can no longer touch you the same way. You move through conversations that once drained you, and they no longer pierce your peace. You walk through systems that once shaped you, and you see their cracks not as something to fear, but as something to understand. You listen to voices that once held power over you, and their tone no longer commands, it reveals. Because once your awareness sharpens, manipulation becomes transparent. It loses its teeth. You can feel the pull, but it can't pull you. You can sense the game, but you no longer play. You can see the illusion, and instead of reacting, you smile quietly in your clarity. Carl Jung once wrote that the possession of knowledge does not kill the sense of wonder and mystery. There is always more mystery, and that's what true mental freedom feels like. Not bitterness, not cynicism, but wonder restored. You see the world's deceptions, yet you still see its beauty. You see its manipulations, yet you still see its poetry. You recognize that the darkness was never the enemy, it was the teacher. It taught you how to see. It forced you to wake up. It stripped away your illusions and left you naked in truth. And that nakedness became your power. You now understand that every manipulator, every system, every false promise was not here to destroy you. They were mirrors, showing you where you still gave your mind away. And once you stop giving it away, no one can ever take it again. Now you live like a monk in motion, grounded in chaos, detached from noise, fully present in a world that runs on distraction. You no longer need to shout to be heard. Your silence has become your authority. Your composure has become your protection. Your awareness has become your weapon. Because the moment you stopped reacting, you became unpredictable, and unpredictability is the death of manipulation. They can't guilt you, because guilt no longer governs you. They can't flatter you, because flattery no longer moves you. They can't threaten you, because fear no longer defines you. You are at last internally untouchable. The world will still test you. It always does. It will throw its illusions like smoke, its narratives like nets, its promises like chains, but you'll see through them all. Not because you've hardened, but because you've woken up. You've realized that manipulation was never about them having power, it was about you giving it. And now that you've stopped giving it, they have nothing left to take. This is the quiet liberation of the conscious mind. No rebellion, no war, just clarity. A clarity so profound it dismantles control without effort. A clarity so powerful it radiates peace in a world built on panic. You become what Jung called the realized self. The one who no longer needs validation to exist, the one who no longer mistakes comfort for safety, the one who no longer hides from truth, the one who no longer fears the shadow because they've walked through it and found light waiting on the other side. You have trained your mind not to fight the world, but to see it as it is, to see through illusion while staying rooted in truth, to hold power without control and love without attachment, to listen to noise and still hear silence beneath it. And in that silence, there is a voice, a quiet, steady voice that was buried under all the noise of manipulation, all the fear, all the guilt, all the endless striving. That voice is you, the original you, the you that existed before the conditioning, before the programming, before the world told you who to be. You've come home to that voice. And now, every time you speak, every time you act, every time you choose, it speaks through you. Calm, unshakable, sovereign. No one can manipulate a person who listens to that voice. No one can control a person who trusts their own truth. No one can dominate a mind that knows itself, because awareness is immunity, and clarity is freedom. So you walk forward, not armored, but awake, not against the world, but above it. You no longer fear the darkness, you navigate it. You no longer resent manipulation, you understand it. And understanding is the end of its power. You've become the watcher behind the mind, the observer beyond the emotion, the awareness beyond the world's illusion. And in that awareness, there is peace, not the peace that hides from noise, the peace that stands calmly in the middle of it and remains untouched. That's the kind of peace you've earned. That's the kind of freedom you've built. That's the kind of power no one can fake, no one can buy, no one can take. You've trained your mind to resist manipulation, and in doing so, you have mastered the rarest art of all, the art of remaining yourself in a world that profits from your forgetfulness, and that is the quiet revolution of the awakened mind, not to escape the world, but to walk through it, untouched, aware, and absolutely free.